For years, Nicki Minaj was one of the loudest celebrity voices openly criticizing Donald Trump. She mocked him, shaded him, and even wove her opposition into her music and public commentary. That's why what happened next left fans genuinely stunned. Almost overnight, Nicki flipped the script. The same man she once dragged relentlessly was suddenly being praised, even labeled as a role model for young men. There was no gradual shift, no long explanation, no public moment of reflection that might help people understand the change. It just happened. And that sudden pivot is exactly what sparked the storm. Fans didn't just notice the change, they questioned it. Because when someone reverses years of public criticism in a matter of months, people don't assume growth, they assume motivation. And the internet did what it always does best. It started digging. The deeper people looked, the more uncomfortable the timing felt. This wasn't just a celebrity changing political opinions. To many, it looked like a move made under pressure, with something serious at stake. And once that idea took hold, there was no putting the conversation back in the box. What really fueled the backlash wasn't just the switch, it was the language Nicki used after making it. She didn't simply say she had reconsidered her views or that she now saw things differently. Instead, she went much further, openly praising Trump and presenting him as a positive example for young men. For longtime fans, that statement hit like whiplash. This was the same Nicki who once criticized his policies, mocked his behavior, and openly questioned his leadership. So when she suddenly framed him as someone worthy of admiration, it didn't feel like evolution, it felt like contradiction. People replayed old interviews, old tweets, old lyrics, stacking them up against her new statements. The contrast was impossible to ignore. And the more people compared past Nicki to present Nicki, the louder the questions became. Was this genuine belief? Was it strategic alignment? Or was something happening behind the scenes that the public wasn't being told? Because when words change this drastically, especially from someone as calculated and media savvy as Nicki Minaj, fans assume there's more to the story than what's being said out loud. This controversy hits harder because Nicki's anti-Trump history wasn't subtle. She didn't just disagree quietly. She was vocal, sarcastic, and unapologetic. She clowned his speeches, questioned his intelligence, and criticized his stance on immigration and women. She even referenced him in her music, using his name as a symbol of everything she claimed to stand against. On social media, she mocked his attempts to appeal to minority voters and openly laughed at his public gaffes. In documentaries and interviews, she framed him as a representation of misogyny and abuse of power in the industry. This wasn't a one-off moment or a phase. It was a consistent pattern spanning years. That's why fans didn't buy the idea that her new stance came from simple reflection. When someone builds an entire public narrative around opposition, reversing that narrative without explanation doesn't read as growth, it reads as damage control. And that's exactly why people started asking what happened in the gap between then and now. Because something clearly shifted, and it wasn't just her opinion. The situation escalated when comedian and commentator DL Hughley weighed in. Known for blending humor with sharp criticism, DL didn't hold back. He called out what he saw as hypocrisy, particularly Nicki's recent comments about protecting children and moral values. According to DL, those statements rang hollow given the people Nicki has publicly defended and aligned herself with. His remarks weren't just jokes. They were pointed observations that hit a nerve with the public. Clips of his commentary spread fast, not because they were outrageous, but because many viewers felt he was saying what they were already thinking. DL reframed the discussion, shifting it from politics to credibility. His message was simple. You can't position yourself as a moral authority while ignoring the serious baggage surrounding those closest to you. Once that framing took hold, the conversation changed. This was no longer about red versus blue. It became about whether Nicki Minaj could convincingly sell a narrative that directly conflicted with her own reality. As fans examined the situation more closely, attention inevitably turned to Nicki's husband. His past legal issues have been public knowledge for years, but many felt they took on new significance in light of Nicki's political pivot. Critics argued that her sudden alignment with power, law, and authority figures didn't exist in a vacuum. They questioned whether her new stance was connected to a desire for protection, influence, or image repair. The timing made people uneasy. When someone with a controversial personal life suddenly cozies up to political power, speculation becomes unavoidable. Nicki's defenders argued that a spouse's past shouldn't define her beliefs, but critics countered that when you publicly defend and minimize that past, it becomes part of your public identity. And once that door opened, fans began asking whether this shift was less about ideology and more about survival. Then there's the issue Nicki almost never addresses publicly: her brother. His conviction and long sentence for crimes involving a minor have followed Nicki for years, even when she tried to keep the matter out of the spotlight. What reignited public outrage was the revelation that Nicki had once written to a judge requesting leniency, describing her brother in glowing terms despite the severity of the case and the evidence presented. For many fans, this was the breaking point. How could someone speak passionately about protecting children while supporting a family member convicted of harming one? The contradiction was too loud to ignore. And while Nicki has largely avoided discussing the matter since, silence didn't erase the record. In fact, it made people question her sincerity even more. When you combine this history with her recent political praise, critics argue that the picture becomes disturbing rather than confusing. Once all these threads were laid out side by side, a theory took over social media: that Nicki's sudden political shift might be strategic. The idea wasn't presented as fact, but as speculation rooted in timing. Fans pointed to Trump's history of granting controversial pardons and asked whether Nicki was attempting to position herself favorably in case she ever needed influence. Others believed the move was about protecting her husband from future complications. Whether true or not, the theory spread fast because it felt plausible to many observers. The internet doesn't need proof to start a conversation. It needs patterns. And in this case, the pattern was hard to ignore. Years of opposition, followed by sudden praise, layered over unresolved legal controversies, created a narrative that practically wrote itself. So the question remains, what actually happened to Nicki Minaj? Is this who she's always been, now finally saying the quiet part out loud? Or is this a calculated move driven by fear, pressure, or desperation? Some believe she's unraveling, pointing to erratic behavior and emotional outbursts. Others think she's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. What's clear is that the public no longer sees this as a harmless opinion change. To many, it feels like a mask slipping or a gamble being taken. And until Nicki directly addresses the contradictions herself, the speculation won't stop. Because once trust cracks, every move gets questioned. And right now, the internet is watching her closer than ever.